loud? It is on. It was. Pulling down the power button. Testing. Hello. Hello. If you, there it is. Okay, everybody, we're starting.
Hi everyone, my name is Tara Das. I'm the presider for this panel on Watched Out. I'm the Government Information Librarian at Columbia University, where I manage government document collections and preservation. I'll make the introductions to the panel presenters and we'll get started. We ask that, given that we're very close to the next room, that to hold all applause till the end. But if you hear anything that you agree with or really resonates with you, just show your hands like this. So that's exactly like what he's doing right there. I just can't do it because I'm holding a mic. Our hash mod is Matthew Thiessen, who's sitting right here. He'll be monitoring the panel hashtag stream and interfacing with remote participants. And the hashtag for our Twitter is hashtag A2, so please use that in addition to the conference Twitter when live tweeting. Matthew Thiessen is an assistant professor in the Faculty of Communication and Design at Ryerson University and a researcher at the Infoscape Research Lab. Dr. Thiessen holds an SSHRC Insight Development Grant in the area of digital economy to support his research on the social implications of algorithmically driven digital technologies. For our panelists, we'll get started with Clara Berridge. She'll be presenting on breathing room and monitored space, privacy and the passive monitoring of adults. Clara is a postdoctoral fellow at Brown University's Center for Gerontology and Healthcare Research. She focuses on social and ethical aspects of technology-based services for older adults and people with disabilities, including remote monitoring, robots, and mobile health. The surveillance of low-wage care workers is her second area of focus, with current attention on the use of cameras in nursing home resident rooms. Next is Nicholas Knuth and Claudia Peterson, who will present on paranoia and contemporary surveillance. Nicholas Knuth is an assistant professor of cinema and media studies at Wellesley College in Wellesley, Massachusetts. His research explores the interstitial spaces between media studies, information science, critical theory, digital art, and science and technology studies. Claudia Costa Peterson holds a PhD in art history from Cornell University. Her research, including collaborations with various artists, addresses the intersections of art, technology, and social movements. She is currently an assistant professor of art and technology at Wichita State University. Next is Benjamin Grosser, who will present on privacy through visibility, disrupting NSA surveillance with algorithmically generated scary stories. Ben Grosser is an artist who explores the cultural, social, and political implications of software. His artworks have been exhibited at I-Beam in New York and the White Building in London and have been featured in Wired, The Atlantic, The Guardian, and Der Spiegel. The Chicago Tribune called him the unrivaled king of ominous gibberish, and Slate referred to his work as creative civil disobedience in the digital age. Lastly is Rahul Mahajan. He will present on legibility projects and eligibility strategies in the digital world. He's an activist and sociologist and has written 2 books about the war on terror, and he blogs occasionally at empirenotes.org. His primary current research involves theoretical characterization of the global economy. So we'll get started with Clara.
Tara, is this loud enough? Would you raise your hand in the back if it's not? Is it on? I just have to really close. Is that okay? Yeah, thank you. All right. So I'm going to talk about privacy in relation to what is called passive monitoring. This represents a generational shift, a technological generational shift from the infamous "I've fallen and I can't get up" alarms. I'm sure you've all seen the commercials where you have to push a button if you need help, to passive continuous monitoring. And it's an active and passive shift in that it doesn't require any action on the part of the older adult, let alone acknowledgement that it's being monitored. So it's continuous monitoring. And I'm talking about a sensor-based system. So this isn't the latest or the highest type of intervention by any means. It's not facial recognition. There's no biometric transmission, no blood pressure. It's not a wearable. But it's the one that's most policy relevant right now. So Medicaid is starting to reimburse these technologies. And so some of the privacy implications are also relevant to these other technologies. So if you can see the faded image, this is a sensor system that I studied. It's called QuietCare, the GE Intel product that's been around for about 8 years. You can think of it as a sophisticated motion detection system. It monitors through algorithms that detect deviations from what it learns is one's normal routine or behavior, and then it generates alarms. Actually, I should note, so that, for example, the AMA, if somebody gets up later than they usually do, they're going to have to account for that increase in call. If they enter the bathroom and they stay in longer than an hour, someone's going to give them a call. It tracks refrigerator use in the apartment. I'm going to show you, this is the most efficient way to describe the technology. I'm going to show it to you. If you can't hear it, I'll summarize it. It's not a big deal if you can't hear it, though.
Resident orders in under 30 minutes. Residents continue to go about their normal routines to their privacy attacked. Meanwhile, QuietCare sensors simulate activities in the distance. This software activity habits of residents. This list makes it easy to spot changes in their routine, which could indicate something clinically significant, such as a urinary tract infection. QuietCare automatically generates an alert and notifies staff so they can respond promptly. Alerts can also help quick intervention, which uses longer delay waiting times, or bad alerts.
So, not in the same sentence, but in the same marketing video, they say staff can monitor resident activity anywhere, anytime, and they also claim that residents continue to go about their normal routine with their privacy intact. So if those things are both true, what do we understand privacy to mean? Technology that's designed for older people, or more often for the people who care for older people, has particularly dangerous assumptions embedded in it. For example, the idea that old people are expected to have some regularity of routine. The service actually relies on problematizing deviation from routine. So think about how potentially institutionalizing that might be, and think about if you were called because you slept until 2 p.m. one day by 3 people to account for your behavior. So a telecare operator stranger gives you a call, your daughter or son gives you a call, and then a social worker in your building gives you a call. Think about the implications of that. In the literature on this, and the elder care aging in place technology, privacy is articulated as a concern that must be given up for care or support to live in one's home. So implicit in this argument is the idea that privacy can't be enjoyed by everyone, that those who need care must relinquish some aspects of their privacy. And given the creative possibilities of technological intervention, simplistic exchange theory, the idea of the exchange of privacy for safety, for independence, is really perplexing. So I looked at legal studies for a more useful framework on privacy. And it turns out that privacy is not only about physical space, the public versus private space. It's not about the nature of information, but it's also about subjectivity. And this really helps, I think, in this case, helps us understand what's at stake in these practices. Julie Cohen explains that claims of privacy invasion are claims about unwanted subjection to the knowledge or power of others. How many of you have read this book? It's been out for years. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. So privacy, and I'm quoting her, is an interest in breathing room to engage in boundary management. So this notion is useful to me because it enables consideration of what kinds of boundary intrusions are considered justified under what conditions, as well as who decides what those conditions are. In the case of passive monitoring, what is it about the target population that makes it possible to claim that their privacy is intact when staff and family members know lived alone or experienced quality and assault eventually. So 98% of the residents who were offered it said no, despite the high subsidized, most people were paying $5 for the scale. Most people didn't want it. It's not that they didn't have money to use it. They didn't want it. And social workers pestered them over sometimes many years, and they still said no. They either eventually shut them down or there's a lot of torture going on. And then among the people who actually said yes, 20% discontinued within the past year when I studied it. So I conducted interviews with the residents, people who use it currently, and the people who continue, the social workers, family members, and I asked about decision making, the actual process of use, and I also asked them directly if it had any effect on their privacy, because I wanted to give them opportunity to speak to that. So I found that there are diverse ways when participants articulate privacy, and there's really no static articulation of privacy in relation to these practices, and I have time to highlight the last one on here. The passive monitoring system produced new knowledge about residents, and the social workers were able to decide how much of that knowledge to expose to residents. So some of them told me that privacy is not a problem because they preserve it because they prevent feedback, what's known as feedback. So they don't let the resident know that they're being monitored. So here Cohen's boundary management framework is analytically useful because it draws attention to the question of how the introduction of passive monitoring So these are the significant areas where boundary intrusions occur in practice. Again, this presentation is just going to focus on the follow-up area. Social workers talked about how they were tactful and were able to preserve people's privacy, either because they wanted to prevent residents from connecting their feeling of having their privacy invaded with the system and then becoming unsatisfied and discontinuing it, or because they realized that not all residents understood that information was being collected about them despite a protocol for informed consent. And I just want to know, these residents did not have dementia, they were competent decision makers. So I asked social workers, when you call a client after you get an email or you get an alert that something's going on in their apartment, do you tell them why you're calling? And they told me sometimes. If the resident likes the system and is really happy with it, sure. If not, maybe they'll think of an excuse. So one woman said, she had a technique, she was very proud of how she did this. She would say, oh, Rose, you're usually so radiant, you look kind of pale because you've been sleeping well. Without telling her, I noticed the system told me you used the bathroom 2 times last night. So, in doing this, they're disallowing breathing space for the resident to determine where their boundaries lie, and then, importantly, how and when to negotiate changes if they want changes. So here a user is explaining that her family member does not have access to information online that they in fact have access to. She was really right out of the loop on this issue. I think you can all see it, so I'll just let you read this for a second. So she's sort of understanding as she realizes the question I asked, that maybe this information is available and she doesn't realize. I don't know, because no one has ever said, how come you went out that early, meaning you left the apartment. I argue that individuals should be informed about the source of concern when alert follow-up calls are made so that they can appreciate what it means to be monitored in this fashion. And then residents who know what information about them is accessed by whom and when and for what purpose are empowered with that feedback to adjust their behavior and interactions according to their own privacy needs. So this is the principle of feedback that's required for someone to be able to control the practice. And then briefly, I asked people directly about intimacy, if residents ever expressed concern about this, and only one staff member interpreted it to mean what I meant as sexual intimacy, but I'll let you read. This former resident, or former user, and some others had heard in my interviews that this was an issue, so I wondered if staff had picked up on this. So then everybody thought intimacy meant getting dressed and undressed in the bedroom. They had no concept. There was these ideas that older adults are asexual, so that didn't come to mind. So this, I'm putting putting this up here to illustrate that close relationships don't necessarily create shared understandings of boundaries for privacy. So family members and social workers do not know everything, and a lot of other adults prefer it that way. And I'm going to end by contextualizing this research in some very new findings from a policy analysis I'm working on. I'm looking at the very first third-party payer to reimburse the technology, and where Medicaid and Medicare goes, so goes the private market in healthcare. So it's something that's really flying under the radar, but through, and this is going to look a little technical, but the waiver programs through Medicaid, through state Medicaid programs, which allows people to stay in their homes or removes them from institutions so they can stay in their home and have home care workers come in, are starting to reimburse use of GPS, sensors like the one I studied, and cameras to replace aids, as the idea that it would save money. There's not a lot of research about this, however, and one of the concerns is that even when states do have a consent process, which many appear not to, privacy is a checkbox on a consent form. And we also have evidence that older adults rarely have full knowledge about when they're being monitored, what that means, who's getting the information. And understanding is presumably required to reflect on whether or not it affects your privacy. So we have a big issue of informed consent and potential covert monitoring here. Thank you. So a phenomenon that limits the conversation in this particular arena is apocalyptic demography, the idea that we have an age wave, this silver tsunami, all these metaphors that really set the tone for the conversation and define older adults first and foremost as expensive, as resource drains. And so when that discourse starts at the bottom line, it can be really hard to elevate it to consider other values in addition to risk management or cost savings, such as privacy or autonomy. And then this paper was just published in the Gerontologist online last week, if you want to read it. And then these are other papers that are coming from this work and are fair game for conversation later. So thanks for your attention.
Hello everyone, thanks for coming, and for those of you who are watching this live stream, thanks for watching as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about a project that we've been working on called Mark for Spooks, and this project is really exploring how we can think about contemporary surveillance in a different way. But for a long time, my collaborator and I, Claudia Peterson, have been, of course, following the Snowden releases, the documents. And there was this moment about a year and a half ago where a number of documents were being released about using online information for psychological operations. And in some of these documents, there are some very odd images. So one was about selling buffalo meat at Whole Foods. I haven't gone over to the Whole Foods yet to really look to see if they're selling buffalo meat there.
I did in Wichita.
Okay, they sell it in Wichita. Okay, this is marked secret. Images of purported UFOs, also marked secret. Text about building cyber magicians.
It just goes on.
Tapes with hearts. And I should note that this is not only coming from the NSA, but also from the British equivalent, the GCHQ, the General Communications Headquarters. So, you know, there's been a lot of journalists and researchers and activists doing really, really wonderful work about trying to decipher all of the complicated technical information coming out of the Snowden documents. But one of the things that hasn't been really explored so much is the imagery from these documents. And there's a wealth of amazing and disturbing and complicated and conflicting imagery here. And so what Claudia and I wanted to do is start exploring what we're calling the cultural imaginary of the NSA. Basically, how do the agents who work in these agencies imagine the world? Because these agencies are, of course, very much in the sense that they work in a black box. We can't get into it at all. And so we're very interested in trying to understand how do they imagine the world, okay? And so we started looking at these images, which we can show you a lot more of them, and we will in a moment. But we also started thinking about it through something else that was originally released by Snowden and reported on by The Intercept, through like Greenwald and others, but was subsequently actually released by the NSA, which is something called Ask Zelda. Okay?
How many of you have heard
Has anyone
of
heard of
this?
Ask Zelda? Okay, so Ask Zelda is, and I kid you not, an internal advice columnist at the NSA. Okay? And Ask Zelda basically would respond to agents' questions about, well, some agency employees are in the office are dressing in ways that are less than professional. How do I, as their supervisor, get them to stop dressing like they're going to the beach? Okay?
Some of them stink.
Some of them stink.
What do we do about that?
How do we deal with that? My boss is spying on me. How do I deal with this? Okay, I'm not making this up. I am not making this up. I don't have that one in there. Okay, so, you know, what we started thinking about is, yes, there's all of the necessary critique and debate and concern that we should have regarding temporary surveillance. However, we also want to understand these people working in these agencies as normal people, right? They have an office job that we can imagine is incredibly boring, right? And so we wanted to try and understand what's going on in their heads. Because, you know, again, these are agencies that we can't get into. All we have are the releases that Snowden has provided to the journalists and have been being leaked. So for a long time, of course, surveillance has been thought of through the panopticon model of Jeremy Bentham and then Michel Foucault, that there's this all-seeing person who can discover everything, can observe everything that's going on. And we think these days that that is perhaps not the right way of thinking about things, you know. And Gilles Deleuze thought about this in different senses with respect to the societies of control. But really, these agencies and the programs that are involved in these agencies are incredibly complex, and there's no one person who can understand everything, right? So we started thinking about this in a different way, and I'll turn this over to Claudia.
Okay, since I'm the art historian, so we're going to be very stereotypical here. So we started thinking about it in terms of Dali, you know. And Dali is, of course, a controversial figure in surrealism. He was very much a provocateur. And so we were thinking about it in terms of the paranoid critical method. I don't know if you ever heard of that. But basically, this is how we constructed these images. And he was making fun of automatism, right? As kind of like being the surrealist thing. And so what he was doing, basically, he was putting images, juxtaposing images and linking images that are not previously connected. And so we talked about this in terms of paranoia. So if you look at a painting like this one, which is his premonition of the Civil War 1936, you know, in Spain, you start looking at it and you have very different figures, and then you start looking at it in terms of it being an illusion, right? And you see that it is body parts and so on. So we wanted to think about it in terms of how is it that, you know, you have these crazy text, and you have these crazy images, and then the NSA and the surveillance apparatus right now works in the same way, basically, right? So we were thinking in terms of things like drone strikes, right? So that's one of the things that you can talk about here. Sure.
Sure. So, you know, basically, when you think about how a lot of these programs are working by the NSA or the GCHQ or many of the other types of surveillance programs, is they work by making associations, right? You link up data from one source to another source to another source, and you start trying to make a narrative out of those links, right? Which is precisely what, let me just go back here, which is precisely what the paranoid critical method is designed to do with Dali. Okay, you have a juxtaposition of seemingly unrelated things that you try and create some sort of narrative from. And so we see that this is how we feel the temporary surveillance apparatus is working.
So you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so we've been thinking about this, especially with respect to a statement from a couple of years ago by the former director of the NSA and the CIA, General Michael Hayden, right, who said, we kill people based off of metadata, right? And so,
So what does it mean?
and so we started thinking about, okay, what does it mean to be using this metadata and the seemingly random links that are being made between disparate sources of information, and using that to mark someone's body as a target in the real world. Okay, and so the project, let's just talk a little bit about the project. The project has a lot of layers that, given time, we're not going to necessarily be able to talk about it at all. But we took a number of these images. Could you actually open up the book? We took a number of these images and put them in a book in order to both materialize a digital these digital images that exist just as PDFs online, but in order to materialize them, and put them in a book. And we added augmentations on top of it, again, working from DALL-E's paranoid critical method in order to comment on some of these things.
So this is us, Zelda, this is the images that we have.
Yep, so we're going to try and do live demos, which are sometimes tricky. So there's actually a program called Fox Acid, and so we juxtaposed it with images from Angry Birds, because it was shown that the NSA was spying on people who were playing Angry Birds in order to sort of map out where certain purported targets were. Maybe we can see targets.
What? Yeah. Okay, we're just showing another one because that's it, right?
Yeah.
Cards.
And so one of the things that you can do with this is, with this app, which is freely available from the App Store, the book is downloadable as, the next page. The book is downloadable as a PDF from the Art for Spooks website. Is when you see things on the page and the augmentations, you can also share these augmentations online. And so this is actually where we're going to get to back to the metadata. So, the Wi-Fi was not working earlier, so I can't show it live. But the idea is you share these images of these augmentations online on, say, Twitter or Flickr, but we modify the metadata a little bit. So this is from a presentation we did last week, where we evidently did this in the federally administrative tribal areas of Pakistan. Okay? So what we do is we modify the GPS coordinates of where it seems that the image is coming from. And this, going back to this question of killing people based off of metadata, there's a fundamental assumption in that statement, which is that the metadata is true. Okay? But as anyone who has worked with computers knows, you can manipulate things to an incredible extent.
So we actually get the information. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that from the drop
yeah,
strikes
exactly.
from
So on Twitter it appears like this. On Flickr, you can also see where things are going to a higher level of granularity, and each of the GPS coordinates that we choose to change come from U.S. drone strikes in Pakistan, coming from the Bureau of Investigative Journalism out of the UK. But that's not the only metadata you can manipulate. You can also manipulate what's called the EXIF data, which is other types of metadata stored in images. And so we changed that to include information about surveillance and text from scholars about surveillance. So this is an excerpt from Gilles Deleuze's Postscripts on the Society of Control. And the idea here is the titular art for spooks. Okay, we cannot communicate with the people who work in these agencies. It's impossible.
Opaque.
They're opaque. They work in these black boxes. However, we wanted to figure out some way to communicate with them through this information, through this metadata. Now, what's interesting is there's been a number of people who have been doing this as well. So, do you want to talk a little bit about?
Okay.
Elahi?
So this is awesome. You've probably seen this before. He did this in 2006, tracking transients. And this is a project. He got arrested in Detroit. I think it was coming from overseas. He's an artist. He's from Bangladesh, right? He grew up in the United States, in New York, but he has a funky name, right? A funky last name. So he was arrested. They found out that, you know, he's not a threat. You know, he's a professor and an artist, but he's not a threat. So one of the things that he did was to come up with this program. You can actually go on this website and track him at all times, right? So what you see, he uploads pictures of food, which bathrooms he goes to, and so on. You know, it's very Duchampian, of course. But this is art that is basically the same idea as ours, right? This is for a very specific audience. It's not for you at all, okay? It's for the spooks, for the people that are tracking us. And then we wanted to just show you this one, because this is one of the things that we are looking at, drone strikes. And this is a project that was done, I think, was it last year? And it's called Not a Bug Splat, right? And bug splat is actually the collateral damage, you know, the targets of drone strike people, operators. This is what you see when they strike somebody. And this is a group of artists from Europe, United States, and in Pakistan that went into Pakistan, in an area which is, you know, known for drone strikes. And what they did is to blow up this huge image of a small girl, and we don't know her name, but her parents were apparently killed during a drone strike. And this image is made for drone operators. It's so big that it actually was made also for satellites, so you can see if the satellites go over. So this is what we're thinking, right, in terms of doing this. And then maybe the last one. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so we'll just finish up. Both of us have did our PhDs in Ithaca near Cornell University, and in upstate New York, for those of you who don't know, there's Hancock Air Force Base outside of Syracuse, where a number of drone missions are flown overseas, and so there's a large number of people who do a number of protests outside of Hancock Air Force Base. One being this woman here, Marianne Grady Flores, who has recently been arrested, charged, and convicted due to her protests up there. She's a grandmother. But what was interesting is when we first started doing this project, we were seeing her in the news, and then we noticed the image in the background, which is the image from the Not a Bug Splat. So I think we're out of time.
And we actually know her. She is known for rum cakes. So we wanted to, give her a shout out.
Yep. And so if you're interested, we have the book and the app here if you want to look at it afterwards. And again, everything's available for download from ArtForSpooks.org. Thanks.
You can't do that.
Okay, great. So I want to start with a shot from The Truman Show. About a quarter of the way into the movie, Truman's love interest, Sylvia, manages to get him isolated on the beach for just a moment. She knows that the people running, we can barely see it, but she knows that the people running the system are going to come get her in a moment, but she has him private for just a minute, and so she tells him a truth. She says, everybody knows everything you do. Everybody's watching you. They're watching you right now. And this is an important moment in the film, and Truman starts to realize that maybe there's something to this suspicion he's been building that somebody's watching him or something weird is going on. And eventually leads him to discover that he's the star of a reality television show. And even though U.S. citizens have had their own suspicions about surveillance of themselves ever since 9/11, it took the revelations from Edward Snowden for us to realize just how widespread that surveillance was, and that in effect we've all become subjects of the NSA's reality television show. They watch us, they know what we're doing right now. And so artists have long engaged the politics of surveillance, using tactical media or hacktivism. And as you might expect, these projects have picked up in the last couple of years, including Art for Spooks, right? For example, Julian Oliver's project Glasshole.sh is a script that kicks Google Glass devices off of Wi-Fi networks in order to dampen the visibility that could come with people wearing these and surveilling you without your knowledge. Amelia Marzek's Signal Strength creates an isolated darknet so that you can have networked interactions between devices without them having access to the larger internet. Leo Salvaggio's You Are Me project, he offers his own face as a mask to allow others to evade face detection and recognition systems. And so these are all strong, clever, artistic approaches to the ubiquity of network surveillance. And they're trying to preserve some degree of privacy in an age when that's becoming nearly impossible. And I certainly understand their strategy of trying to hide from surveillance. The NSA doesn't just want to read your email, they don't want to just hear your phone call, they want to see everything. So I'm also a fan of looking at slides from the Snowden archive. One of the most interesting documents from my perspective is this one they call their new collection posture. And this bubble right here, collect it all, is their internal ideology. They want everything from everybody. And the tool that enables them to do this, computational surveillance, collecting material, analyzing it, etc., is software. And as an artist, I focus on the cultural, social, and political implications of software, thinking about it from a software studies perspective, or what Matthew Fuller would describe as the conditions of possibility. What does software make possible? How does it limit who we are and what we do? And so really what I'm thinking about is the relationship between software and privacy. Privacy is an essential part of being human. And as Bentham shows with panoptic prism design, when we know we're being watched, it changes what we do. So in the wake of the Snowden revelations, I wondered how computational surveillance is changing how we act and interact online. And in the project I'm going to show you, I chose as my primary material email, looking at the surveillance of email. And one of the strategies used by the NSA in its email surveillance is the automated detection of predetermined keywords to detect communications by presumed terrorists. And I don't know what those keywords are because at least Glenn Greenwald and Snowden haven't leaked them out into the world yet, but I can make some educated guesses. So this is an analyst desktop binder from the Department of Homeland Security, and it contains a list of keywords that they're supposed to monitor social media for. In other words, words that they should watch out for that might indicate something's about to happen. And this list is enlightening. So it has words you'd expect, right? It's got Al-Qaeda, it's got dirty bomb, it's got Iran, Iraq. But it's the words that I didn't expect that I find most interesting. Facility, plot, power, bridge, general purpose words. And what happens then is this automated keyword searching sets up large collections of words becoming codified as something to fear or as indicators of intent. And so, in my opinion, the result is a government surveillance machine run amok, algorithmically collecting and searching our communications in a futile effort to predict behaviors based on words in your email. And so, my response to this computational surveillance is a product that I call ScareMail. ScareMail is a free and open source browser extension that makes email scary in an attempt to disrupt NSA surveillance. It extends Google's Gmail, adding to every new email signature an algorithmically generated narrative containing a collection of probable NSA search keywords. And so to create these narratives, I start with an original source text. In my case, I used Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. And I wrote software that uses natural language processing to go through the book and identify all the nouns and verbs. And then it swaps them out with properly formatted and conjugated scary words from the Department of Homeland Security list. So I used it then to create 10 versions that are kind of scary versions of Fahrenheit 451. And then every time you hit compose in Gmail, the software generates a new unique narrative based on those texts and attaches it to the end of your email. And the results are without intended meaning, yet they do read as plausible enough sounding and looking narratives. So I'll read one. Captain Beatty failed on his Al-Shabaab, packing restlessly about the fact to fish this far and strand her group on the wall-to-wall in calling suspicious packages. And in this empty cloud with a peaceful man on one long sickening person of power. He recalled his agent and the orange grid scam with its child and his woman tonight, with the Coast Guard to the dark place for which he told the problem of the great government of fairy earthquakes. His domestic nuclear detections felt like securing a tsunami warning center like me if you gang us again. We looted a fact to see the time after time. So the idea is that an algorithm hopefully will think, oh, I need to pay attention to this, and maybe even pass it to a human who will go, is there something I need to focus on here? The text also maintained the general formatting style of the original book. So it has dialogue quotations and different things like that. This one goes, yes, he asked, landed afraid that Aideen might crash the loose week together and bridge her firmly. He went 300 drugs downstream when the government of the rare biological infections, he freaked the span, how completely dark and tiny, in fine spill, the 2600s delicately trafficked thereon, and all the armed revolutionary forces docking on the light loud. Here we plot. And so these stories act as traps then for the NSA's surveillance algorithms, forcing them to look at this algorithmically generated nonsense, and each story is unique in an attempt to avoid automated filtering by the NSA's search systems. And so when I released Scare Mail, it's been out for about 1.5 years now. On Twitter, for example, some people were just enthusiastic. This person said, love this idea, Scare Mail makes email scary, distracts, confuses NSA. They can do something, you can fight back, right? It got a lot of press. For example, The Atlantic got into the counterintuitive nature of it with the art project that wants the NSA to read your email. Fast Company speculated about the consequences of using something if you were to choose to use Scare Mail with your own Gmail account with the tagline, but don't blame us when the feds knock on your door. Other people, so comment on The Guardian, said, yeah, this is hilarious until they actually come to arrest you, or worse, just take you for a ride. A comment on Slate's, referring to me as the artist, said, he just made it onto the no-fly list, congratulations. But I should point out that a lot of people think what I'm doing is just really bad. They think that I'm thwarting our ability to combat terrorism. So this person said, it's not funny and it's not cool. These immature knobs are deciding on our behalf that they would prefer their families to be bombed instead of the government knowing what they browse. And by far the most high-profile publication to talk about it in this way was the Sunday Opinion page, the Chicago Tribune, where they equated using Scare Mail to literally threatening to have the same effect as outing undercover agents or selling plastic guns that can evade metal detectors. And I think these negative responses are particularly interesting because all Scare Mail does is add nonsense to the end of email. Yet it produces this huge reaction of people believing that that is the same or similar to a terrorist act. And even supporters of the project, people who are like, I would love to use Scare Mail, but then the NSA is going to pay more attention to me, so they're reluctant to use the project as well. So clearly computational surveillance is having an effect on how people act and interact online. And the ability to use whatever words we want is one of the basic freedoms that we have. And this surveillance is thwarting that. And it also, I'd say that Scare Mail reveals one of the primary flaws of the NSA surveillance efforts, which is that words do not necessarily equal intent. It also draws attention to the NSA's problems with that collected all ideology. In the run-up to 9/11, the U.S. intelligence community had all the information it needed to discern the plot. but the haystacks were too big for them to find it. And in response to that, ever since, they've made their haystacks infinitely bigger, so they really can't find anything. And the world's primary response to this collected all ideology is to use encryption to hide our communications from the NSA. It's an understandable response, but it's a symmetrical one that tries to compete with the NSA on its own turf. With ScareMail, I'm using a different strategy, one that Alexander Galloway would refer to as an exploit, or an asymmetric response to the ubiquity of network state power. I can't compete with the NSA's ability to crack encryption or to build backdoors into encryption algorithms in the first place, but I can use their desire to collect everything against them. In other words, I can give their search algorithms just what they're looking for: more scary words. And if every email contains the scary words the NSA is looking for, then searching for those words becomes a fruitless exercise. Because a search that returns everything is a search that returns nothing of use. And so, really to wrap it up here, with ScareMail, I'm proposing an alternative model of privacy. It's a model of privacy built on visibility and noise rather than encryption and silence. Thanks.
To know, to live in the assurance that shadowy government agencies like the NSA or Britain's GCHQ are constantly vacuuming up your information, legally or in most cases illegally, trying to break encryption, trying to find everything they can about everybody. It's quite another for me to learn that they've actually deliberately engaged in a premeditated campaign to undermine, for example, and re-engineer the architecture of the web, the architecture of encryption on which pretty much anything we do on the web depends so much, either through undermining the actual algorithms driving RSA, for example, to use a faulty random number generator, or through brute force sort of hacking in and getting digital signatures from this Dutch company whose name is Gemalto, from the SIM cards of their cell phones, so that they can create backdoors into actual mobile devices so that they can undermine encryption. What they're doing is actually not just trying to surveil, but trying to change the entire landscape that they're surveilling in order to make it easier to surveil. Although both of those things are quite distasteful, the general surveillance and the specific re-engineering, the latter seems to me to be more profound in a couple of ways. One is that it's an attempt to preempt ab initio any attempt at resistance to surveillance. And another is that when you engage in this kind of wholesale re-engineering, it's bound to have ramifying effects that you're not thinking about, and that even if you were thinking about, you quite likely would not be able to predict. And so, for example, once you build backdoors into encryption algorithms, you are fatally weakening, potentially at least, the security in ways that other people can exploit as well. It's very frustrating to talk about this because we don't know, right? All we know is these incredibly ugly PowerPoints that occasionally get released when Greenwald has finished processing them, which just are a bunch of catchphrases and ideas, but we don't know actually what's going on. We have no way of trying to figure out, for example, what's happened to the security of banking systems, or the ability of corporations to steal trade secrets from each other with the help of their government, or of course the likelihood that any of us are going to be sanctioned for expressing our political opinions. All of these things, the possibilities for them are radically changed in ways that none of us know, and certainly the NSA doesn't know, by the re-engineering that they're doing. So what I want to say is that we should start, when we're thinking about surveillance and counter-surveillance, we should start with something like this, and we should also think about it not as sort of an example of the unique vulnerabilities and potentialities of the digital world, or the unique dastardliness of the NSA, but actually as the latest in a sort of a battle that has been going on throughout the history of civilization. So this battle started when the first city-state built the first walls, put little gates in them, so that if you were coming into the state, you had to go through the gate and hit a customs checkpoint, or a currency changer, or any number of other things which would serve the state's project of not only controlling who enters the city, but also of extracting resources from you. All right, so that involves a dramatic change of the architecture of the city, right? Putting up walls, restricting access, and the reason it's done is that it takes a data set, which is to say people, the set of people who are coming in to the city and what they are carrying with them, that is incredibly hard to pin down and almost impossible for the state to know without prohibitive effort, and transform it into something that's very, very easy. A handful of customs officials and watchmen and so on can gather this data for the state with minimal effort, simply because of the way that they have transformed the architecture of the city. So the political scientist James Scott calls projects like this that states have engaged in since time immemorial legibility projects. They are projects that take sets of data that are very difficult to read and somehow make them into sets of data that's often incredibly easy to read. Sometimes they do it just through transforming the data, telling people, for example, to change their names, to have last names so it's easier to keep a population register where you don't have 5,000 people named Abdullah, which is, by the way, still a problem for the NSA when it's dealing with counterterrorism efforts. Sometimes it's through re-engineering the architecture of the city. Sometimes it's through re-engineering basic geography, leveling highlands and areas where it's difficult for the state to have access and making access easier, building roads. These are all parts of legibility projects that Scott talks about in his book, if you're interested in seeing like the state, and which are, not only are they a fundamental part of the history of states, they are particularly characteristic of what you might call modern and modernizing states. And in the 20th century, these projects have often been incredibly destructive. Take one example, the forced collectivization of Soviet agriculture. Scott and others argue the primary reason for this was to make it easier for the state to appropriate grain from farmers, not to increase necessarily, at least right away, productivity or increase well-being of the people producing, but for the state to appropriate grain. This was, of course, very much linked with the genocide that Ukrainians call the Holodomor that killed billions of people. So they're very high stakes involved in these things. In the digital world, legibility projects hopefully don't involve potential genocide, but the stakes are clearly, I think we all know, not low. The other side of the coin, which Scott also talks about in yet another book, is yes, states have agency, but so do other actors, so do individuals, and so do organizations of individuals or communities. So very often in response to legibility projects, these groups engage in strategies of illegibility. All right, so the first time a city-state built a wall and created a customs post is also the first time somebody tried to figure out a way to land at some other point in the river and sneak into the city, or build a house right up next to the wall and put a little door in it. So strategies of evasion and strategies of transforming the way you do things so as to make the hardest for the state to render your activities legible are also very old. So Scott talks about, for example, peasant societies in the Southeast Asian highlands that they flee to those highlands, first of all, to escape state-building projects which are largely extractive. They transform their lives. So, for example, instead of raising paddy rice, which is the thing that you do in Southeast Asia, which is very easy for the state to collect, tally, and appropriate, they raise root crops which are very easy to hide from the state. Things like that. He even argues that they choose illiteracy and morality as strategies which are almost by definition illegibility strategies in order to resist what the state is doing. If we think about the digital world, think about just surveillance, because legibility and illegibility are much broader than just the question of surveillance. But think about the question of surveillance. Right now, we have to actually widen Scott's framework a bit, because we're not just talking about states as the bad guys. All right, and the digital world was built just as much by corporations as by states. And corporations very often, some of them the infrastructure corporations, which is to say not just Cisco and the cable companies, but Google and Facebook and Twitter, these organizations often loom larger, at least in some ways, over the digital world than states do. They engage in legibility projects too. If you think about how Google has transformed search, or how Facebook has created this elaborate architecture of social networks which are updated constantly in real time to look at all of your activities. What are these? Primarily, these are legibility projects designed to take all of you and render you into a massive information about consumption of products, influence and access to other people who are also consumers of products, and then sell those to advertisers. Right? That's the primary thing. But what they've also done, and it's a feature, not a bug, is rendered all of us legible to each other in a way that certainly on a global scale was never the case before. And they have also, and this probably is a bug, or at least something they had not thought fully about, makes us very, very legible to states. So, for example, when Turkey is cracking down on free speech, it's much, much easier for them to put someone in jail for a Facebook post or a tweet than it is for something they say or something they write or something they present, even in a live stream forum like this. But all of those kinds of legibility have been created by corporations, and they're all of great concern. It's not simply that legibility to the state is the only concern, it's legibility to all these kinds of actors who are relatively unaccountable to you. So, people have evolved illegibility strategies in response to that. So if you want to avoid the notice of somebody, say you don't like, you're in Twitter or something, you subtweet. Right? You figure out ways of passive-aggressively talking or writing about them so that they don't quite know, at least if they're not quite as clever as you, what you're up to. Or if you're an activist in Turkey, again, you might use the word tyran, meaning tyrant, instead of Erdogan, the president, so as to avoid, standard kinds of filtering. Or if you're more sophisticated, you might use screen caps, pictures instead of text. Right? So these are examples of, again, this war of legibility versus illegibility. And they also point out something profoundly different about the digital world, which is that these strategies evolve very quickly. So once they have cracked that really subtle code of Tyran for Erdogan, it's just as easy for the state to search on that as it was on Erdogan. You've gained, in a sense, a few days or a week, and then you have to come up with something entirely new. Or to take another example, perhaps the oldest illegibility strategy that's still fairly effective in some cases today, you can see it in the first Gulf War when the NSA was almost useless against the Iraqi army, in part because whenever they did get a signals intercept, they turned out the Iraqis had the clever idea to use their own language. And NSA linguists were not up to doing the task quickly enough. This was a problem even with 9/11, where the NSA had Arabic intercepts the day before the attack, but didn't translate at the time. But now think about, we all know the way that the digital world is evolving, our evolving computer overlords. Within 10 years, this will be completely ineffective strategy for the rest of time, because our computer overlords will have the ability to acquire and translate in real time any audio signals they want. So I think that I'm trying to figure out how we can think about what are the kinds of strategies that are being used in the digital world. In what ways are they profoundly affected by the fact that they are digital? And one of the things I'm hoping that the reason I came to this conference is I'm still trying to figure out a little bit of this stuff, and I'm hoping there are some of you who know a lot more about things that people are doing in this, again, as I said, age-old war.
Really illustrated just how complex the concepts are of surveillance, resistance, and privacy. And I think especially thinking about resistance in terms of privacy as a boundary to be maintained, not only amongst those who are under surveillance, but those who are conducting their surveillance, whether it's social workers or bureaucrats in the NSA, I think is really interesting. And also thinking about resistance as a way of engaging but disrupting activities is really interesting. And whether that engaging in order to disrupt activities is that kind of objective harmonious with still maintaining one's privacy. Because I think that, as you pointed out, some people didn't want to use the Scare Mail extension because they felt it would actually open them up to more privacy. Whereas you're arguing that this is a way to protect privacy in the midst of increased visibility as opposed to silence. So I think it was just very good, I feel, across the presentation, just thinking about how complex these notions are and how they still require delineation, and as Rahul was pointing out, with legibility and illegibility strategies. These are not new ideas. This is something that's been going on, ideas that have been wrestling with for a long time. So that being said, we'll open it up to questions. Any questions from the audience? Let's see, I think we have another microphone.
Susan. My name is Stephen Mentor. I study cyborgs. I teach in San Francisco, California. I just came from my parents' house in East Long Meadow, where we went to an assisted living living facility. So I guess two things I had a question for you, Claire. One is you've got talked about the rhetorics of aging and how we need to do this because these are extreme situations. And I wanted to ask you, are there other people who study that kind of rhetoric? Because I studied the rhetoric of in vitro fertilization, the idea of the last chance, this is your last chance, and how powerful these rhetorics are, because on the other side of this, if we don't do this kind of monitoring, what are the practices that would be more appropriate to balance privacy with the actual needs of aging people like my father? Hope that was a good question.
I think I got the second question. I just remind me. Is this on? Okay. Yeah, so there are people, I think, within a subfield called critical gerontology who question the rhetoric and challenge underlying assumptions about aging services. They don't get picked up much in mainstream gerontology or school of public health, things like that, where the people who are influencing policy are not talking about that. But I mean, we need political will to allocate enough funds to provide care for older people. I mean, the idea is that there are not enough workers. Of course there are enough workers. We just pay them $9 an hour and they don't have any benefits or control of their jobs. And they're mostly immigrant women with children who can't raise a family on that. But there are also ways to enable privacy. It's just that most of the people who develop these technologies are young men who do not have any experience with disability. They're largely creating these systems for old, frail women. So there's a big disconnect. And I don't know if they use the term participatory design anymore. That's probably a dated term, but we need to catch up there.
never going to catch up. So I wonder what the real question is in redefining how these infrastructures work from the side of the power, rather than from the side of
Hey, is this on?
As much as they're
Answer's the same as it was before.
Still not.
So I guess, I hope this is addressing, I would say two things. One that I probably should have gotten to in the talk is that there was this one time where there's this amazing thing that actually might have enabled individuals to get really ahead in this particular war, and that was the advent of strong encryption algorithms. And as soon as they started to come up in the 70s, the United States government in particular was adamantly opposed and tried every way to stop it. Since it was the 70s, it was kind of a unique time. They oddly enough tried legal and transparent ways like passing legislation. But more recently, as we know, they tried quite a few other kinds of ways. So this was a real threat. They had the real fear that the entire cyber world was going to go dark. Right? That encryption would make it impossible forever for them to figure any of these things out. And by the way, I don't think that would be an unalloyed good. It would certainly be good in a lot of ways, but you can imagine all kinds of problems that go with it. The other thing I would say, and this is kind of weak tea by comparison, is that at least in theory, now that some of this knowledge is out, you can rely on the idea that states now, unlike say some of the states that Scott was talking about, are supposed to actually be serving their citizens, not just taking things from them. And that in particular, what we sometimes call democratic processes and legal constraints on these things may be a way of fighting back collectively that could allow you to get out, as you said, always being the underdog.
We have about 5 minutes left, and I just wanted to make sure that we didn't neglect our remote audience. So Matt, anything from the Twitter feed?
This thing on? From Twitter, I don't know how remote everyone was, but a couple of themes or sort of connected tweets from Jojo Carlin. How to become passive aggressive to thwart people trying to read us. And I'll sort of throw these out for the panel. They sort of come as a collectivity in a sense. From Josh Scannell. Ugh, God, our politics cannot come down to subtweeting, please, no. From Nate Fisk. Isn't a search that returns everything simply a means to provide the NSA with reasonable suspicion in every case? And those are sort of the primary ones about. I mean, there doesn't seem to be a real like. Let's all just stop using Facebook and get off these godforsaken platforms.
I mean, I think part of the reason there isn't that sentiment is because it's not realistic. Using Facebook, using Gmail, or some kind of email system is a requirement of every job, and every social interaction environment that we have these days. So you can't just throw them away. To address the one that was towards scare mail, doesn't adding all this to every email produce reasonable suspicion in every case? Yeah, maybe, and that's part of the point. If everybody is suspicious, then all of a sudden nobody is suspicious. It's kind of the gesture of the project, and in a way, to me, then it also gives the opportunity to point out kind of the absurdity of presuming that something at the bottom of an email like this could constitute reasonable suspicion, especially when it's done en masse or done programmatically or otherwise.
And just on that question as well, I am blanking on the exact statistics right now, but if I recall, people have been studies about the number of felonies that we all commit each day. And so there's this way in which any sort of narrative, and this goes to why we're interested in this, looking at this through paranoia, that you can create any sort of narrative about someone's behavior that could then become, a reality which causes someone to die overseas, but could cause a particular type of investigation to occur here. And it's that paranoia that creates these narratives, and everyone in this room, a narrative could be made to, that could contribute to these.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that one of the things that we wanted to do is also to extend this idea of the heuristics of revelation, right? That's what we have now. So we have, we have all these things coming, being leaked and so on, and nothing is really happening, right? So we're kind of frustrated with that as well. That kind of Marxist thinking. We're trying to actually open up the question. And one of the things that we are seeing, like we were speaking about this at the Media Festival last week, and people started asking questions about, well, maybe we should be talking about surveillance in this very sweeping way. We should start looking at communities, like what you were doing, right? And one of the things that they were talking about is communities of color. There's a lot of experience there for, battle wars and stuff. So they were just talking about that, and I think this is something that needs to be opened up. And, artists are trying to do that. And I think both of our projects are about that. This is not about, tweeting as kind of, a remedy or something. It's a provocation.
Okay, great. So now we can give a real hand of applause to our presenters.
I enjoyed your presentation. I used to work at nursing homes.